Cultivation is a 2D Unity project based on traditional turn-based RPG systems and 2D side-scrollers. One of my favorite systems implemented was the dialogue system. It runs between 3 scripts, but predominantly works with a dialogue manager object and a dialogue trigger script. Dialogue can be added through the inspector using a series of arrays, allowing you to change how many sentences or how many screens pop up that the game will run through. There's even a stop coroutines function built in to prevent the code from having errors in case the player skips through the dialogue or just spams the continue button. The side-scrolling sections rely on character and enemy controllers made up with basic platforming. Something I got to work with in Engine that I don't often get the chance to was the tile maps. They're separated into 2 layers, one for the background elements that the player can't interact with, and one for tiles the player does interact with. Turn-based combat was my favorite part to work on. It runs using an array that contains the different states of battle, such as the player turn or the enemy's turn. The attack and item buttons open up sub-menus that allow you to select different actions, and they are programmed so that they will close automatically, even if you don't pick an option that's from that sub-menu. Like, if you open the attack sub-menu and then you pick the guard action, they still close. The game is also programmed so that while the player turn and the enemy turns are going on, if you click any of the buttons that are on the screen, nothing will happen, so that you don't interrupt the game flow. Most art in the game are assets found online, but there are a few I made myself, such as the battle platforms the players and the enemies stand on, and also the music playing in the background right now. It's the only audio that's in-game, but it's a song I wrote personally, not an asset that I found online, so I just wanted to include that as well for the game. One element I'm very proud of is the scripting for the player character and the enemies in the turn-based combat section. They run on the same script, so with just a few changes with object prefabs, you can actually play as the NPCs in the game and also even the enemies if you so wanted to. For the mechanics of the game, if you guard, your player takes a stance and will take reduced damage from the next enemy's attack. Ally lets you use your ally to attack, and they usually do a lot more damage along with consuming mana. If you don't have enough mana to use an ally's attack, the attack will not go off. And we also have a dialogue box at the bottom left that informs the player of, if the slime is defeated, how much damage they take, and so on. Assets used in-game come from RVROS, who provided the player and slime sprites, Clembod for the female fighter sprites, Jesse for the skeleton sprites, Amatnicus for the tile maps, and Thaleah for the font. All of these assets come from itch.io, with links to the original pages in the README file, but also in the description of this video. While not inherently a part of the prototype, I wanted to show off the documentation for the game. It's been, in my experience working with game production, that I find that when you keep well-organized documentation and communication for team members, it leads to a much smoother development process. I've used sites like Trello in the past, but for this project I used Milanote. And here I kept track of ideas for the game, information both for myself, but also information that would have been helpful for artists, designers, other programmers that would have been on the team. I listed stuff like the animation variables that the animation controllers ran on, what the Z values were for tile maps and characters, and all other information. It was basically a mini game design document for the prototype. A link to the document is in the description of the video. One of the biggest struggles I found for the prototype was animation. It's not something I have a lot of experience in working with, and so at first, animation ran on one integer variable called state that acted like state 0 is an idle animation, state 1 is running, and so forth. But that tended to really clutter up the code, and it just wasn't a reliable way to manage animation. So instead, I started using multiple variables, especially booleans, for information like if the player was jumping or touching the ground, and that really helped smooth out the animation in-game and kept the code looking clean.